Hi guys, welcome back to my Nix Reads book channel. If you love any kind of bookish content like book hauls, reviews, wrap-ups, and TBRs, then you should subscribe. And today I wanted to talk to you guys about my January reading wrap-up. I read 6 books in total and I have everything from 1 all the way up to 5 stars. The first book that I finished is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is a very well-known dystopian fiction book that was published in 1985. This is quite the scary topic. In this dystopian world, it is very hard to reproduce for humans because of the toxic environment. So men and women are being classified and put into different groups. So there's an organization that puts out these most likely to be fertile women who then get assigned to a couple to basically function as a vessel to get pregnant. And our main character, Offred, is one of those women who are called handmaidens. Unlike any modern dystopian novel that we have, this is not about an active uprising and a riot to change the system. It consists of chapters from Offred's point of view, where you basically go with her through her very awful, dreadful, boring, and scary life as a handmaiden, and you also have a lot of flashbacks to the time before. And I think the scary part is not just the world that she lives in, but the sense of resignation that you sometimes feel she has. It sometimes feels like she succumbed to her faith, but she does have a spark of hope in her where she's basically looking for signs if somebody around her is against the system that they live in. I gave this book 4 stars out of 5. Enjoy is probably not the correct word to describe it. It is definitely more a slow burn type of book. Obviously, this book is not solely for entertainment. It makes you think about the role of females around the world. I don't want to give anything away, but I will say that this book has kind of an open ending. There is a second book out. I think it's called The Testaments or something along those lines, which, to be honest, I'm not sure if I will pick it up because I think this was very effective as a standalone, and I'm kind of scared that the second book will just kind of let me down. The next book I picked up is Sadie by Courtney. This was a very sad and devastating read. It will tear your heart into small pieces. Sadie is a teenage girl who grew up in very difficult circumstances, with her mom basically gone, and one day her little sister Maddie, who she took care of her whole life, is suddenly found murdered. And this is not a story about us trying to figure out what exactly happened to Maddie. It's more a story about what is happening to Sadie, because she decides to run away and basically go on a vigilante mission to find her sister's killer and bring him into justice. So this story is told through both Sadie's point of view, but also through podcasts that are about Sadie's disappearance, where people that were involved in Sadie's and Maddie's life are being interviewed. So I listened to this as an audiobook, and I can very much recommend it because of the podcast aspect of it. And also, someone in this book has a stutter. The person narrating it did a very good job. You should definitely look up the trigger warnings if needed before going into this story, because there's a lot. This story is a tale of abuse of all kinds. And what was also exceptional about this book was that it portrayed the lack of resources and money really well, because Sadie grew up in a trailer house and she basically leaves on this mission without having anything. So she goes through hunger, through having to sleep in her car and not being able to shower. And I think that was described very realistically and made that whole journey just even harder than it already was. So I can definitely recommend this book, especially the audio version. Then I also finished The Guest List by Lucy Foley, which probably a lot of you have already picked up, and I'm very curious what you thought about it. Let me know, because to me this was a 2-star read, so it felt very flat. I will say that this was entertaining. It made me want to keep listening because I listened to this also as an audiobook from my Libby app. I'm actually glad that I didn't spend the money to buy the physical copy. It was intriguing enough for me to want to go on and listen to what's coming next. It's really more like a beach read than a serious thriller. So this is kind of a closed circle murder mystery type book. We have a wedding party on an Irish island, and somebody is murdered and we have to go along with the characters to figure out who died and also who done it. And first of all, I was kind of expecting a kind of old English style atmospheric read, kind of along the lines of Agatha Christie. This was not it, so I think my expectations for this were already kind of skewed. The story and the characters were definitely a bit closer to modern reality with the technology that they use and TV shows that they mentioned and stuff like that, so that kind of took away of that Irish style manner atmosphere that I was expecting. The way the story is set up is you have a prologue of the night of the murder where people start to figure out that something is very, very wrong, and then you jump back in time the day or two before, where you go from one point of view to the next, where you basically get to know the characters and their backstories, and then sometimes you also have a chapter in between of, again, the night of the murder, where you kind of get closer and closer to the mystery of who was actually murdered. I couldn't quite enjoy this mystery because it's very clear who the victim is, and then it's also very, very clear who of the people have the motive to do it. So essentially, you already know who's the victim, you already have your suspects. It's just a question of who of these people has actually done it. But then it's not that interesting because there's just so many crazy coincidences that lead to these people being viable suspects that in the end you don't really care. And it's very hard to connect with the characters because their backgrounds feel heavily plotted out. So you kind of feel tricked into you're supposed to really care for these characters, but it just feels too forced. And then quite a few of the characters' choices I just really couldn't get behind. It was quite frankly a bit unbelievable. I think that it would have been enough to just have that one prologue about the night of the murder. I think it was quite unnecessary to keep putting the chapters in between of the night of the murder. These chapters did not contribute to the story at all. So all in all, I think this can be quite a nice beach read or beginner's thriller. It is really just not that great. And I can't wrap my head around this being the best thriller of the year from I think 1 or 2 years ago on Goodreads. And honestly, I think the only reason for that is it got a lot of votes because it was a Reese's Book Club pick, which I haven't been very lucky with those picks in the last months. Next up, I have my first 5-star read of the year. It's 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriella Garcia Marquez. This is part of my 2022 Classic Reads Challenge. I will link the video somewhere here on the top. It is a video where I explain that I have picked 10 classic books to read this year. And I am thrilled that the first one I picked up from these 10 was a 5-star read for me. This surprised me so much. So you stick with this family through multiple generations for 100 years, and you get to know all the different generations, the characters, their issues. You're very, very close to their love lives, which I didn't expect. There's a lot of pining and lust and forbidden romance in here. And I think what the author intended was what happened in this town was supposed to mirror what was happening in Colombia. So you go through different events that mirror things like colonialism, industrialism, and civil war, and so on. And not to forget, this book is the mother of magical realism, which I didn't know before going into this book. That's something I figured out when I was, I think, 20% in. There's so many bizarre and whimsical elements that are woven into the story that you just kind of have to wrap your head around, or just basically let it be. Like, don't try to understand what is happening in these magical moments. You just kind of have to read on and enjoy and just take it for what it is. This is probably one of the only books I've ever read that is at the same time very, very dense, but also a page turner. The language, the writing is beautiful. And a lot of people will tell you that this is very confusing because there's so many generations in the family where people just have the same name or a variation of it. So what I did was, because I heard about that issue, whenever I encountered a new family member, I would add to this little family tree that I basically put in the front of my book. And honestly, that was the best idea ever, because this way I was always on track with Who am I reading about, and what is their relation to the other characters in this book? This book is full of tragedy and human faults, wrong decisions, and just people driven to decisions that are made out of impulse, it feels like. The story is very much full of the ugly but also wonderful things that you can experience in life. I highly, highly recommend reading this if you haven't done so yet. So going from a 5-star read all the way down to a 1-star read, we have King of Battle and Blood by Scarlett and Clair. And although I gave this the lowest rating possible, this has a very special place in my heart because in the beginning of the year, I told my boyfriend to pick out 2 or 3 books for me randomly that he thinks sound interesting, or could be a fun read for me. I did this the year before, and he introduced me to books that otherwise I probably would have never picked up. And so yeah, I just wanted to add books to my TBR that I haven't heard of. And this is one of them. I've never heard of this author or this book before, but he picked it out because it was like a recommendation, and I think he said it was in like the homepage of Indigo was like a new release or something like that. So this is in fact how do I even call this? Is it a vampire fantasy romance book with a heavy emphasis on romance? So this fulfills many tropes. It is about a Princess Isolde. That's just how I'm going to say the name. I don't know if it's completely correct. Who has to go into, is that what you call marriage for convenience? She basically has to marry this vampire king so that her kingdom and her family is protected. Obviously, she really, really wants to hate him because he's a monster vampire, but at the same time, she's crazily attracted to him. And because this is a romance, this has a lot of like sex scenes and steamy scenes. That's honestly all you need to know about the plot because quite frankly, there's not a lot of plot in here. So the first 100 to 200 pages are all fun and games. I'm not expecting a full-on developed fantasy story here, so it's kind of like I can laugh about it. It's fun, it's steamy, but after 200 pages you want to be done with this book because that's when you're noticing there's not a lot of plot in here. The characterizations are not that great, and even the romance scenes, they're kind of recycled, so you're over this book very fast, but it's 400 pages. And the last 50 pages of this book, let me tell you, they were bad. They were really, really bad because the author just threw in so much new information that sometimes even didn't make a lot of sense, and just to basically wrap up a fantasy story, but then there wasn't a lot of fantasy elements in here. It was all just like pining and lust and hate and all those nice things that make for a good 200-page romance book, but this is a book that's also trying to be a serious 400-page fantasy novel, and that just really doesn't work. I feel like the author should have just picked a lane. I did read afterwards that the author admitted in some kind of interview that she was, I think, in a rush to finish this book, which it really reads like that. And a lot of the expressions are recycled. You read them over and over again in different variations. So yeah, the first 200 pages were a lot of fun. I was enjoying myself. I was laughing, not at the book, but with the book, not taking things too seriously. But then getting through the last 200 pages, especially the last 50 pages, were a bit much. If you enjoyed this book, then good for you. I do understand, but for me, it's not really my thing, and I'm probably not going to pick up any more books by Scarlett St. Clair, unfortunately. And the last book I finished in January is The Chestnut Man by Soren Sveistrup. I'm sorry if I butchered that name. I do not speak Danish. This was such an incredible read and just a great high note to end my January reading month. I was just left very disappointed, unfortunately, with most of the thrillers that I read last year, so this has been the most amazing thriller I have picked up in a while. This takes place in Denmark, and what happens in the beginning of the story is a mother is found mutilated and murdered on a playground, and the police find a little chestnut man on the site of the murder. And what baffles them is that on that chestnut man, there's fingerprints of a girl that was murdered a year ago. So the question is, why is there fingerprints on a chestnut man from a little girl that was murdered in the past? And what does it have to do with the murdered mother from the present? This is a big book. It has over 500 pages, but it reads so fast because it does a thing where the chapters are quite short and they leave you on a cliffhanger. So at times I did have to take a step back and think about, is this book really that good, or am I just being tricked into reading it very fast because I can't put it down because of how the chapters are put together? And the answer is yes, it does trick you a bit into reading this book fast, but it is amazing. This book is quite graphic and it definitely made me feel queasy at times. I think I even had a nightmare about this book once because I read it right before bed, which was not a great idea. It has so many great twists and turns in here, and the way that the story plays out is very satisfying and at the same time unpredictable. So in my case, while I was, I had my ideas of what is going on, you're left in the dark for I think at least 70% of the book, and only when it was officially announced who the murderer was, that is when I knew. I had no clue before that, because at that point it could have been multiple people. The murderer can't really be a character that you've never heard about, right? It has to be someone that you already encountered within the story at least a few times, but still I wasn't able to tell way beforehand because there was just so many clues that needed to be discovered, because you start out with a very vague picture and there was just a lot of unknowns to be filled out, which only happened peu à peu. So this was really well done. So the detective figures felt fresh and non-cliche, and also there was no unnecessary romance in this book. This book is twisted, awful, gruesome, and can get quite graphic, but it is fantastic. Which leads me to think, if I finally want to stop being disappointed by thrillers, maybe I should just go back to reading Scandinavian authors. I don't know what runs in their waters, but was great, and now I'm kind of tempted to pick up, what's the name of that author? It's from a Swedish author, the girl with the dragon tattoo. So I'm tempted to pick that up next. And by the way, this was turned into a show that I think is available on Netflix. So if you don't feel like reading the book, then you should watch that. So that is it. I hope you enjoyed this. I will try to do more wrap-ups this year because I think it's a great way to reflect on what you read. And I hope that some of these made it to your TBR. Let me know if it did, if some of these intrigued you. If I had to give you one book out of everything I told you about to read, okay, this is actually hard. Either 100 Years of Solitude or The Chestnut Man. Those were fantastic, depending on what you're in the mood for. So let me know what you think, if you've read any of these, and yeah, connect with me on Goodreads, and I will see you in the next one.